is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offender behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Today, there's the latest on Labour's anti-Semitism crisis, now turning into a full-blown meltdown. Sir Keir Starmer's dumped 2 election candidates, but now apparently he's under pressure to investigate 5 more. Also coming up, Rishi Sunak has had some good economic news today at long last, but will he suffer 2 damaging by-election defeats tomorrow? And I'll talk about the asylum seeker convicted of a terror offence who claimed she moved to the UK because she was being persecuted by Hamas. You couldn't make it up, and that's all coming up in your next hour. Thanks for joining me on the show. Now, as ever, I want to hear from you and also want to trail an exclusive interview we've got coming later in the show with Josie and Ted Saunders. Pensioners from Northamptonshire threatened with eviction by their council from their £200,000 home to make way for asylum seekers. A story that sums up broken Britain and our total lack of priorities. We'll speak to them later in the show. You will not want to miss that. Let me know what you think about that. And also 16,000 homes today hoovered up by the government for asylum seekers, part of a £4 billion pledge to house people coming to our country. Do you feel that British people and pensioners are simply now at the back of the queue? Let me know your views, gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you very much. 1 minute past 3, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The rate of inflation remains at 4%, the same as in December, despite forecasters having predicted a rise. Figures from the ONS found that food prices fell on a monthly basis for the first time since September 2021. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the figure, saying the Conservatives cannot fix the economy because they are the reason it's broken. The Prime Minister has insisted the economy has turned a corner, though, as he held his first Business Council meeting of the year today. However, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says more needs to be done.
Inflation never falls in a straight line, and although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%, and we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates. So this is a time to stick to a plan that is clearly working, but we need to make sure that we really get to that end point of inflation at 2%.
Pressures mounting for Sir Keir Starmer as a second Labour Party candidate has been suspended following accusations of anti-Semitism. Graham Jones allegedly suggested British people who volunteer to fight with Israel Defence Forces should be locked up. This comes a day after Labour withdrew support for the party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, Azhar Ali, for suggesting Israel had taken the October 7th Hamas assault as a pretext to invade Gaza. Sakir vowed yesterday that his party has changed under his rule. Train drivers on Northern and LNER will walk out on the 1st of March and ban overtime for 3 days in a separate row to the national pay dispute. Meanwhile, train drivers at 5 rail operators have voted to continue taking strike action for 6 months. ASLEF announced that its members on Chiltern, C2C, East Midlands, Northern and TransPennine railways had overwhelmingly backed carrying on with the strikes. Unions involved in pay disputes have to reballot their members every 6 months on continuing with industrial action. General Secretary of ASLEF Mick Whelan says the union remains open and willing to talk about a revised pay offer. A London theatre has banned a comedian from performing after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of a show. Paul Curry presented both a Ukrainian and a Palestinian flag to the audience. He's been accused of encouraging the crowd to chant and shout at Israeli ticket holder Liav Eaton after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. Soho Theatre in central London has apologised and says it's looking into the incident. There are reports his next show could be cancelled. Mr. Eaton told GB News he'd felt excluded.
In the last 5 minutes of his show, since he produced those 2 flags, I was taken immediately out of the show. In my head, I was...
You felt excluded?
Yeah, excluded, and just in my mind, I was just thinking about how unfair this comparison is. I just really didn't agree with that statement.
18 of 31 NATO countries, according to its chief, are on track to meet the 2% military spending target. Jens Stoltenberg was speaking at a conference where he says overall spending is set for another record year. That's as Russia's full-fledged war against Ukraine enters its 3rd year. He also says NATO's European states will invest a combined total of around £302 billion in defence this year. His comments come as British troops departed Southampton yesterday, headed for Poland, to take part in the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War. That's to demonstrate the alliance's capabilities. Crossbow owners could face police checks under government plans to stop the weapons being used in violent attacks. This comes after convicted stalker Bryce Hodgson was shot dead by police last month after he broke into a London home armed with weapons including a crossbow. There's currently no registration system for owning one and no need for a licence. Shoplifting has hit a record high. That's according to the British Retail Consortium, with almost 17 million incidents recorded last year. That's more than double compared to the year before, which was 8 million. The amount lost to shoplifting costs retailers around £1.8 billion, a record sum, and the first time it surpassed the £1 billion mark. Violence and abuse against shop workers also spiked last year, with around 1,300 incidents daily. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper calls the figures shocking. And the Queen, known for her love of art, has been touring a series of art studios thanks to a recommendation from her daughter. Camilla visited Kindred Studios in West London during an open day, meeting with painters, sculptors and modern artists. Meanwhile, the King has returned to Sandringham after spending just over 24 hours at his London home, Clarence House. It's thought Charles visited the capital for his latest bout of cancer treatment following the announcement of his diagnosis last week. And lions at Whipsnade Zoo have been enjoying a perfect Valentine's treat as the public showers them with scented gifts. The zoo asked people to donate their unused fragrances, which were sprayed on sacks filled with straw or on trees to create enticing scent trails. Zookeepers say the smell of perfumes and aftershaves enhances the lion's sensory experience and encourages them to explore. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Martin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Great show ahead today. Lots to get our teeth stuck into. And, of course, we must start with the anti-Semitism crisis now that's engulfing the Labour Party. Sir Keir Starmer has ditched 2 parliamentary candidates due to alleged anti-Semitic comments. And The Telegraph today says the party is being pressured to investigate a further 5 candidates. And yesterday, Labour suspended former MP Graham Jones, who'd been selected to stand for the seat of Hyndburn near Blackburn at the next general election. Jones made a derogatory comment about Israel, an expletive-riddled one, it has to be said, at a meeting after Hamas's attacks on October the 7th. And a day earlier, Labour withdrew its support for the party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, of course, Azir Ali, after he made blatant anti-Semitic remarks at the same meeting. Well, earlier on today, GB News heard from former Labour MP Chris Williamson. He told us that, in his opinion, criticism of Israel isn't necessarily anti-Semitic.
It's a conflation of criticism of Israel. And whatever you think about that conspiracy theory, it's not something I agree with, although, as I say, it has been carried in some detail in the New York Times, amongst other august journals, as I've said. But that doesn't constitute anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israel, indulging in conspiracy theories, is not the same as expressing, hatred or bigotry towards Jews.
Yeah, that's Chris Williamson, who's repeatedly refused to condemn Hamas as terrorists. Anyway, I'm joined in our studio by our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, this is turning into a nightmare for Starmer. They were cruising ahead in the polls. Now they've dropped 7 points in a poll out today. Savanta, they're now 41, the Conservatives on 29. It feels like a disaster of their own making. But the big question is this, Chris. Was this a disaster that was always waiting to happen? And October the 7th, if you like, just shone a light on the ugly anti-Semitism that seems to lurk within the party.
So Keir Starmer became Labour leader by saying he's not Jeremy Corbyn. And the way he's shown that is by cleansing the party of this association with anti-Semitism, which grew up under Corbyn. And that's why I think October the 7th attacks on Israel have been almost the moment when that was really put under the spotlight. These figures out today from Savanta are bad for Labour, down to 41%, Tories up 2 to 29%. The difference now is 12 points, not 20 points. But that poll ended just as news broke about the remarks by Mr. Ali in Rochdale. We don't even know the response yet from the voters to what's happening with this renewed concern about anti-Semitism in the party. Of course, Mr. Ali has since put out a statement withdrawing those remarks he made in that meeting with Lancashire Conservatives. Today we have, of course, is Graham Jones, a former Labour MP, 2010-2019. He referred to effing Israel, talked about Israel with an expletive. His problem appears to be not challenging Mr. Ali and what Mr. Ali said, because there is a difference between attacking Israel and its behaviour and the way it's behaved in Gaza. Obviously, self-defence is acceptable, but has it gone further than that? That's a live debate in international politics. And attacking Jews, which is appalling. And that's the difference which the Labour Party appears to struggle with.
And straight after October the 7th, we had the Labour Muslim Network writing 350 councillors getting on a front foot. A minister has resigned. This continues on and on and on. And fair play to Sir Keir Starmer. He did act quickly yesterday. He kicked Graham Jones out sharply.
After the event, though, so Mr. Ali's remarks emerged Saturday night. He then took them back, apologised in a mail on Sunday. And then, of course, Lisa Nandy appeared at an event on Sunday. We saw other ministers come out and defend Mr. Ali and defend the way that Sir Keir Starmer has behaved. It wasn't until 7:30 on Monday night, 2 days later, when more remarks emerged that he was suspended as a candidate, or at least the support was withdrawn from him as a candidate in Rochdale.
Do you think that this now feels like Sir Keir Starmer is playing whack-a-mole? There are so many people, maybe that share these beliefs publicly, some privately, maybe quite a few more. And can he really get rid of this? If he gets rid of everybody who has these kind of opinions, will there be many left?
Well, there will be. I mean, all the concerns so far stem from a single meeting with Lancashire Labour Party when these views were not challenged by anyone in the room, and that's the problem, I think. It was tolerated. We have heard today, haven't we, from the Jewish Labour movement, Mike Katz saying that the idea that the bad old days of Corbyn leadership are back is ludicrous, he says. You have got a leader here who is trying to make all the right noises, but this has allowed the Tory party to pile in properly. You've seen remarks overnight from the party chairman, Richard Holden. He's saying, same old Labour. Are you surprised, it said in the subject. Labour hasn't changed, and Azhar Ali is proof of that. So the problem they've got is, if you're in politics, being in opposition is the easy bit. Your jobs are find good MPs and find good policies and win an election. That's the three jobs. And they're failing on both those counts at the moment. They're yet to see what the effect will be at the ballot box when these by-elections are held in Wellingborough and Kingswood tomorrow, and looking forward February 29th in Rochdale.
And Chris, we've seen this spilling over into some real-world action, some ugly stuff. Tobias Elwood, Conservative MP, outside his house, a mob formed up and was shouting. They were saying posters of him voting for genocide. And turns out the ringleader was the one Corrie Jew, who used to be a parliamentary candidate, stood for the Labour Party in 2019 as a Corbynista. Once again underlines the fact that the sharper end of this seems to be spearheaded by the hard left.
Well, the left are certainly involved, and we heard last night, didn't we, from Jonathan Gullis, a Tory MP, Redwall MP. He's very concerned about what he's facing in his family. He's saying he would take matters in his own hands if his house was approached by people. So it's across the board, I think. When you have, it should be a safe place to debate anything you like in the House of Commons, but when that extends into threats in real life, we saw it, didn't we, with the recent Labour MP quitting over that. It's appalling.
Well, let's cut now to the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, James Daly, who joins us on the show. James, welcome to the show. Always pleasure.
Hi.
James, I wanted to start, if we could, on our last comment here in the studio, and that is the propensity for this to spill out into real-world action. We've seen ugly scenes at the home of Tobias Elwood, inside with his kids, and Jonathan Gullis spoke out last night saying if the mob turned up outside his house, he'll be forced to take action. I wanted to ask you, James, in your position as Deputy Chair, what are the party doing to guarantee the safety of elected representatives? Are they talking to you about it? And also, what would you do if the mob turned up at your gaff?
Well, the scenes we saw outside Tobias's house were appalling and absolutely dreadful. This is a wider question. It's not a party political question, Martin. This is a question of democracy. And if democracy is now reduced to 100 people turning up for 3 hours outside an MP's house, shouting in the street, carrying placards with the most hateful allegations, and the police don't appear to be doing anything about that. These are real concerns. This is not. I've spoken to Labour colleagues about this. We cannot have rule by the mob. We have to have the ability for MPs to be able to put forward their political views in a safe environment. And what I've seen recently, which has been absolutely embodied in what you're saying, is an utter disgrace. We could have a discussion, Martin, about the issue, the very serious issue of Palestine. We're talking here about the safety of people. Can anybody in the right mind tell me how 100 people gathering on a street for 3 hours, shouting and saying appalling, carrying placards which have appalling images on, is in the public interest? And certainly when there's 2 poor children in there and their father is being treated in this way, it's absolutely appalling. And the security of MPs needs to be the priority, I think, for the House authorities and also for the police. Mike Freer, a great friend of mine, a great MP, a great man, he was going out with a stab vest, Martin. His office was firebombed. He's been chased out of politics because we are getting extremists, and they do tend to be, I shall say, extremists on the left of politics, who don't seem to have any issue with behaving in the most appalling way. Somebody I know in Mike's constituency said, surely if you disagree with him, you can vote him out. But to be harassing, intimidating and bullying is an utter disgrace. And we need to face up to this and address it.
OK, James, I need to cut across you there because on the subject of that mob who went to Tory MP Tobias Ellwood's house, Rishi Sunak has supported his colleague. The Prime Minister has just tweeted this: democracy is built on free debate, but increasingly MPs have been targeted by aggressive mobs for exercising those freedoms. We will never let those who intimidate prevail. It's paramount MP security is protected and our democratic values upheld. Nothing is more important. And on that note, James, I'm joined in the studio by our political editor, Chris Hope. He has a question for you.
Well, James, I wondered, as a deputy chairman of the party, what are you doing to protect people like Tobias Ellwood? Are you offering support? Are you giving him a ring? What kind of protective arm are you putting around your MPs?
Tobias has many friends in the party and many colleagues who are concerned about him, who are close friends of his. But Chris, let's get frank about this. This is not, what happened to Tobias. He has all of our sympathies and we'll do everything possible to assist and help him. But this is about every single MP in the House of Commons. You've been around the House for long enough. You know that we have plate and various other House protections. And there are some real concerns about some of the policies that are in place to protect members of Parliament, to allow them to go about their business. Members of Parliament, their families, their loved ones, their young children, they've not asked to be involved in politics. I have no problem at all, Chris, with people coming outside my office or coming to me directly or doing anything else. But I do have some questions to ask, Chris. I wasn't there. Why the police allowed this, seemingly for a number of hours, for people to behave in this way in such a situation where two children were present and saw this behaviour? It is absolutely. It is scandalous that this was allowed to happen.
James, can I quickly ask before you go back to Martin, what's the worst you've experienced in Bury? Have you taken any similar action to Mike Freer, stab vests, or have you experienced, what's the worst experience you've had of this kind of protesting?
There's people, well, protests are protests. Perhaps I take it, I take things on the chin and get on with it. But let me just tell you an example where things have come. That a practicing solicitor on social media said that my two children were collateral damage to my actions as an MP, a practicing solicitor. So let's just say this type of behaviour is not limited to one section of the community. And the level of extremism and the level of anger and aggressive behaviour to my colleagues across the political spectrum, all of whom I respect, all of them are doing their best to put over a legitimate point of view, is democracy is under attack here, Chris. And it's a mixture between, colleagues will always support each other. Colleagues will always help each other. But we're never going to be there when the mob, and I'll say the mob, turns up outside colleagues' homes. And we need the police to be there to take the strongest possible action. And we also need the House authorities to realise and recognise that there are some real issues with the personal security of MPs.
OK, James, I need to quickly ask you, so let's just say the mob turn up at your house tonight. What would you do?
I would call the police and I would hope they would come out. I've got two children. Are we really getting to the point where if they turn outside my house and start saying things and start putting placards up saying you've got blood on your hands and making reference to genocide? Tobias Ellwood has not got blood on his hands. It's utterly preposterous. Would the police just watch? And I hope they wouldn't do in Greater Manchester and just watch and allow people to intimidate, bully and threaten. And it is a very, very, very bad state of affairs we're getting into when we tolerate this type of behaviour. Every one of my colleagues deserves protection because they're doing the best possible job they can and they are putting forward legitimate views. And this type of behaviour, Martin, is as the Prime Minister says, is an attack on democracy.
James Daly, thank you for your frank and forthright opinions on the show today. Deputy Chair of the Tory Party and MP for Bury North. Thanks for joining us, James Daly. Now, here are the candidates standing in the Rochdale by-election. They are Azir Ali, Independent, Mark Coleman, Independent, Simon Danzuk, Reform UK, Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat, Paul Ellison, Conservative, George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain, Michael Howarth, Independent, William Howarth, Independent, Guy Otten, Green Party, Raving Rodent Subordinate, Official Monster Raving Loony Party, and David Tully, who's also an independent candidate. Now, I'll have lots more on Labour's problems with anti-Semitism throughout the show, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Now it's time now for our brand new Great British Giveaway and your chance to win £18,000 in cold, hard cash. And here's all the details that you need for a chance to make that yours.
This is your chance to win £18,000 cash in our very latest Great British giveaway. Cash to spend on anything you like. That's like having an extra £1,500 in your bank account each month for a whole year. What would you use that for? It could go towards your mortgage or rent, buy monthly treats, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, this time tomorrow, people in Wellingborough will be voting in a new MP. The Tories are defending a majority of more than 18,000, but will they be beaten in yet another by-election? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time, and I think you can do both. Now, tell me, it's lovely to see you first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it, as you know, Eamon. You can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category, it's just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I've proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
you were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as we said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:26. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll talk about the incredible case of the asylum seeker convicted of a terror offence yesterday who told the court she travelled to the UK because she was being persecuted by Hamas. Before that, Rishi Sunak will come under more pressure if the Tories lose tomorrow's 2 by-elections. The Conservatives are defending big majorities in Kingswood near Bristol and also in Wellingborough. GB News' East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has been to Wellingborough in Northamptonshire. Here's this package.
Ooh, it's horrible. Get your dinghies out and get your rowing boats out.
Sid has lived in Wellingborough since he was 3 years old. Now aged 58, few people know it better.
There's Clark's shut. Supercuts are shut. There's about 5 or 6 shut in there.
He's seen the town change.
It used to be the market area since 1267, and it went a couple of years ago. It was a damn good market.
Sid says it's not safe in Wellingborough at night.
Once it gets near dark, go home now.
A by-election is coming to the town. The Northamptonshire constituency is ideal for testing political temperatures ahead of the general election. Locals like Martin say the town needs more money.
We need investment. We have empty shops all over the place that are being dilapidated.
Wellingborough is suffering from many of the same symptoms that are familiar across English towns: antisocial behaviour, crime, and not enough jobs for people who do want to work but can't find the employment that's right for them. Employment here is traditionally low wage. Skilled or not, it can be tough to compete.
You throw one up there, and when it reaches that point there, you throw the next one up.
Even if you're willing to learn. Keith's desperate to find a job, but right now it isn't easy. He's juggling unemployment and family loss. Stress is taking a toll.
I think that might be because of the cost of living, and also another thing which is against me slightly is age. But as I say, if they could find businesses which do employ older people, that would be more than helpful.
The elected MP may only last a few months. By-election success can be fleeting. The people counting on change remain regardless of results. Sid still has hope for his hometown.
If they update it how it's supposed to be in the 21st century, it'd be a nice place. How it used to be. It will be a lovely place to live. That's why people are moving out. They've had enough.
Will Hollis, GB News in Wellingborough.
In the Wellingborough by-election, and they are Nick the Flying Brick, the official Monster Raving Loony Party, Anna Savage Gun, Liberal Democrat, Ben Habib, Reform UK, Helen Harrison, Conservative, Ankit Love Nop J Marler, Post-Mortem Independent, Jen Kitchen, Labour, Alex Marola, Britain First, Will Morris, Green Party, Andre Pine Bailey, Independent, Marion Turner Hawes, Independent, and also Kevin Watts as an Independent. And you can find out who wins the key by-elections in Wellingborough and Kingswood in a special GB News programme, Vote 2024. The People Decide, and that will be presented by our very own Tom Harwood from midnight tomorrow night right here on GB News. And Nigel Farage will be one of the special guests on that show. All the results from those two crucial by-elections live as they come in. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, will tell us what today's inflation news means for the pound in your pockets. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom this hour. The rate of inflation remains at 4%, the same as in December, despite forecasters having predicted a rise. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found that food prices fell on a monthly basis for the first time since September 2021. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the figure, saying Conservatives cannot fix the economy because they are the reason it's broken. The Prime Minister has insisted, though, that the economy has turned a corner. That's as he held his first Business Council meeting of the year. Pressures mounting for Sir Keir Starmer as a second Labour Party candidate has been suspended following accusations of anti-Semitism. Graham Jones allegedly suggested British people who volunteer to fight with Israel Defence Forces should be locked up. This comes a day after Labour withdrew support for the party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, Azhar Ali, for suggesting Israel had taken the October 7th Hamas assault as a pretext to invade Gaza. Sir Keir vowed yesterday that his party has changed under his rule. Train drivers on Northern and LNER will walk out on the 1st of March and ban overtime for 3 days in a separate row to the national pay dispute. Meanwhile, train drivers at 5 rail operators have voted to continue taking strike action for 6 months. ASLEF announced that its members on Chiltern, C2C, East Midlands, Northern and Transpennine Railways had overwhelmingly backed carrying on with the strikes. General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan, says the union remains open and willing to talk about a revised pay offer. And a London theatre has banned a comedian from performing after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of a show. Paul Curry presented both a Ukrainian and a Palestinian flag to the audience. He's been accused of encouraging the crowd to chant and shout at Israeli ticket holder Liav Eaton after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. Soho Theatre in central London has apologised and says it's looking into the incident. There are reports his next show could be cancelled. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2550 and 1.1706 euros. The price of gold is £1,583 and 73 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,570 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now, inflation stayed at 4% last month, which has surprised most experts because it was expected to go up. But does that mean we can expect interest rates to be cut? Here's hoping. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later in the show, I bring the remarkable story of the hundreds of motorists who will be fined for speeding after a prankster put up a fake 50-mile-an-hour sign. But before that, there was some good news for Rishi Sunak today as inflation finally didn't rise. It was widely expected that inflation would go up in January, but it remains steady at 4%. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says that their plan is working.
Inflation never falls in a straight line, and although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%. And we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates. So this is a time to stick to a plan that is clearly working, but we need to make sure that we really get to that end point of inflation at 2%. It's clearly welcome that in a cost of living crisis, wages are going up by faster than inflation. But what we want is for that to happen on a sustained basis. And that means getting inflation lower than it is today. It's still too high at 4%. We need it to be back down at 2%. And then we can be confident that as wages grow, it won't be inflationary. And that's why we need to stick to our plan.
So companies need to show restraint?
Well, what we need to do is to make sure that we don't do anything that compromises the battle against inflation. It's still too high at 4%. We need it to be down at 2%. Then interest rates can come down, and we won't have to worry about the pressure from wage rises.
Well, Jeremy Hunt seems happy with himself, but meanwhile, what about in the real world? Well, we're of course the People's Channel, so we want to know what the great British public think about today's news about inflation. So let's cross to Birmingham and speak to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson. Jack, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. So, the Chancellor seems pretty smug. He's happy. What about the fair and wonderful people of Birmingham?
Well, the rain falling around me probably shows a bit more of the gloomier outlook that people here in Birmingham have on this quite stagnant, obviously, inflation figure sticking at 4%. There was some surprise when I was asking people going to work this morning that it has stayed at 4% because, of course, all last week we had these forecasters saying that they thought it could go up to the likes of 4.5%. Of course, we had that rise in the energy price cap, didn't we? But different factors, including, of course, the drop in the price of things like furniture, that 0.4% drop that we got in the likes of food as well, means that things have averaged out, and it has mean that inflation has stayed the same at 4%. So that made some people this morning a little bit happier, but talking to people on the street, there's certainly really, you can really see the real impact that people are still having, the real impact of inflation, particularly food price inflation, because of course it might have come down by 0.5%, but on January 2020 it's still up around 25%. Things in the supermarket still up around 25% more expensive. But here's what a few people on the high street told me a little bit earlier on.
I don't know, I think it's crazy. I mean, the rich seem to be getting richer and the poor just get poorer. We're on the poverty line, we're just struggling to survive.
It's getting very difficult for us to live. Financially, we're having to spend more and more on gas and electric, and the food prices are going up.
Inflation is just a number to most people. They don't really understand exactly what it is. I think if you look at it and you look at the price of electricity, food, etc., that doesn't seem to be falling or rising in line with the inflation.
We're not buying things that we would normally buy. We're going for own brand things, like in shops, instead of going like Heinz, for example.
Inflation, the prices go up. I wish they went down.
So you can hear there really the impact that it's still having on people's lives. The fact that some people are still having to cut down on luxuries. Yes, inflation is a lot lower than it has been at its highest, but the fact is real here on the high street, it still really is impacting people's spending, people not knowing if they can afford those luxuries, having to deal with still rising energy bills and having to work out how they can, of course, budget themselves around that. You heard from Jeremy Hunt just shortly ago there, talking about how it never comes down in a straight line, talking about how they still believe, the government, that they are on the right track towards that 2% target that the Bank of England has. Of course, the knock-on effect of the likes of this inflation figure is, of course, whether the Bank of England will judge as when is the right time to, of course, maybe start reducing interest rates. But Rachel Reeves, of course, the Shadow Chancellor, saying that the Conservatives can't really get the country out of this mess. Of course, they're the ones that have been in power for 14 years.
OK, Jack Carlson, thank you, live from Birmingham. And you almost get swept away by a road sweeper there, Jack. Normally not much friend of the reporter, although, as we know, Birmingham City Council, Jack, recently declared bankruptcy, so thank goodness they're still out cleaning the streets. Jack Carlson, live from Birmingham, thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Now, still to come, I'll look at the case of the 3 women convicted yesterday of a terror offence at a pro-Palestine protest. But first, in a GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country.
One of the biggest issues we're facing today in the manufacturing and engineering sectors is the fact that there's a skills shortage and a skills gap. But there's companies out there like this one that are doing something about it. So, Paul, what's happening here?
Well, here at Income Training, we deliver engineering and manufacturing apprenticeships. So we start people in their engineering career, like the people we see behind us today. And this year we've had our biggest intake ever of people going into engineering and manufacturing on an apprenticeship to shape their future.
So how did we get into this situation in the first place?
It's a result of generations of people not coming into the sector. We're trying to do something about that. We're trying to show everyone that engineering manufacture is a great career and apprenticeship is a great route into that career.
And how are you doing this?
What we're doing at Income is inspiring young people to come into the sector. There's loads of companies, big and small, within the UK, and these people are, whether they want to use their brain or use their hands, they're going into careers that'll last them a lifetime.
And it's not just apprenticeships, is it?
It's not, no. So we are bridging skills gaps through a variety of programmes. Last year we launched the first ever UK Tooling Academy in partnership with Grandara, a Birmingham-based company, and that's for bringing in people who are already engineers to go from here to here through our full-time programme.
But you're also upskilling too, aren't you?
We are. We launched the UK's first ever Tooling Academy at our other site. That is about upskilling existing engineers in the tooling sector to go from here to here through a 20-week full-time programme.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a Conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you,
sure,
and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain,
but it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, you know, one year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase, and that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:48. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, at 4 o'clock, I'm going to have the latest on the anti-Semitism crisis that's now engulfed the Labour Party. But first, the latest on the conflict in the Middle East. And Israeli forces have launched what they've called an extensive wave of attacks in Lebanon. They started just a few hours after a Hezbollah rocket attack on the northern Israeli town of Safed, where one person was killed and at least 8 others were reportedly injured. Well, I'm joined now by reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, welcome to the show. The situation gets ever more precarious in the Middle East. What's the latest?
Well, that rocket attack from Hezbollah into northern Israel hit a Northern Army Command building in the area, killing 1 woman, we've heard, in the last hour, and those 8 others rescued by helicopter to local emergency hospitals. The reaction from the Israeli Air Force was very soon after. They struck targets way further north than they previously had in southern Lebanon, and the Israeli Defense Forces have said in the last hour that they were targeting elements of the Radwan forces, which is the so-called elite special forces element of Hezbollah, the Iran-backed terrorist organization which has extensive control within Lebanon. Now, these attacks this morning by Hezbollah, the rocket attacks, the barrage that struck those buildings in northern Israel, came just a day after Hassan Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah, said that there would be no peace in the Israeli-Lebanese border region until a ceasefire was enacted in Gaza. So how close are we to that ceasefire? Well, yesterday, chiefs from the spy agencies from the United States and from Israel met with Egyptian and also Qatari delegations in Cairo to discuss progress for the ceasefire negotiations and for the release of hostages and the entry of aid within Cairo. And that meeting, according to the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, was constructive and progress has been made. But at the same time, we have heard reports in Israeli media this morning that there is increasing concern on the Israeli side about the demands being made by Hamas for the exchange of those hostages. Some 134 remain, and when 110 of them were freed during those ceasefires in November, that was mostly due to the exchange with Palestinian prisoners held mostly within the West Bank. Apparently, the concern in Israel is that the amount of demand and the number of prisoners that Hamas want released is too high. Well, in the meantime, this significant escalation in Lebanon is a concerning development. And could we see other Iran-backed proxies react further as that imminent ground invasion of Rafah looms amid considerable international concern? We'll keep an eye on all of the developing progress in those areas.
OK, Charlie Peters, excellent summary as ever. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, moving on, an asylum seeker convicted of a terror offence at a pro-Palestine protest claims she moved to the UK after being persecuted by Hamas. Heba al-Hayek was one of the 3 women found guilty of carrying or displaying an article to arouse reasonable suspicion that they are supporters of a banned organisation, Hamas. They had images of a paraglider just 1 week after Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis on their terrorist invasion on October the 7th. Al-Hayek's barrister told the court that she was concerned the conviction would affect her refugee status and could affect her family in Gaza. An astonishing story. And to pick over this now, I can now speak with immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Harjap, welcome to the show. This is a story I just try and need to make sense of this because for the life of me, it's driving me and thousands of people watching this show bonkers. So, this individual was convicted of a terror-related incident, but it turns out the judge didn't agree she supported Hamas, even though the Crown Prosecution Service Special Crime and Counter-Terrorism Unit did think she was supporting Hamas. But mostly, the biggest dilemma for me is that she's an asylum seeker here who was claiming to be fleeing Hamas, yet she was supporting Hamas. Help me make sense of this.
Yeah, it's a bizarre story. So you've got a case here where somebody's claimed asylum and been very critical of Hamas in the past, and on that basis they've got asylum, goes to a protest, displays images of a paraglider, I believe, and which the police have thought, well, hold on, this is in support of Hamas and this is against certain terrorism acts. So the police prosecute, the judge hears the case, and the judge gives a conditional discharge, which in essence is finding them guilty, but is not jailing them. A conditional discharge is saying, well, hold on, you won't go to jail or prison, but if you do commit a further offence in the period of this discharge, then you will be resentenced for the original offence. And in the finding, the judge said, well, there is no evidence to show that she supports Hamas. In fact, it's evidence to the contrary. Now, this is the whole situation, and the whole situation we find ourselves in is bizarre because, you know, supporting Hamas or not, or criticising Hamas, and yet alongside also not supporting 20 odd or even more 20,000 people who have been killed in Gaza, of 70% of which are women and children, let's not forget. You know, they are not mutually exclusive. You can still be critical of Hamas, and, you know, you can also be critical of the fact that people have been killed and it's disproportionate and Israel's response is not proportionate. You can still be critical of all of that and just wish peace generally. So I think this shows us what a complex situation it is. And the emotions that it brings out.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there, Harjap Singh Bangal. We could talk about this all day, but we have to leave it there.
Good.
OK, so Keir Starmer's under pressure after Labour has ditched 2 candidates amid an ongoing anti-Semitism crisis. We'll have the full story on that. After this, I'm Martin Daubney on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. There'll be further rain to come for some of us, but for many of us it'll be a cloudy afternoon and evening with that mild air persisting, so it'll stay very close and muggy through this evening and overnight. That mild air is pushing north through the afternoon and it will reach the far north of Scotland, where they have been escaping much of the wet weather so far today. So a cloudy night to come, plenty of rain arriving as well from the south and west. It'll push up to the northeast, and then that's where it will sit through the evening, covering much of Scotland through much of the night, so some heavy bursts of rain to come here. Further south, though, it should dry out by the morning. However, if you are over close to any higher ground or close to coastal areas, it'll be quite a misty morning once again, and another very mild start to the day. Tomorrow, there'll be some quite persistent rain across parts of South Wales and the southwest. There's been quite a lot of rainfall already here so far this month, so there are some rain warnings in force for here, as well as some areas of the Midlands as well. So we could see some travel disruption in these areas. But for many of us, we will see some further rainfall through Thursday. It's only in the southeast where we will escape the rain through much of the day, and it will be a mild afternoon there.
That rain will clear away through Friday morning to leave many of us with a much brighter and drier day. So a bit of an improvement to come on Friday, some sunny spells by the afternoon, but there will be some further rain through Saturday evening and into Sunday. See you later on.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basic-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this
Yes?
training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah.
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each
Why
other.
do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Today, there's the latest on Labour's anti-Semitism crisis that's engulfing the party. Sir Keir Starmer's now dumped 2 election candidates, but now apparently he's under pressure to investigate a further 5 more. I'm going to speak to someone from the Jewish Voice for Labour later on in the show. And Rishi Sunak has had some good economic news at long last today, but would he suffer 2 damaging by-election defeats tomorrow? And Harry and Meghan are in Canada, having flown there in their private jet, of course. Can they, in all seriousness, continue with their eco-friendly nonsense? And on Valentine's Day, we'll hear about the online dating hopeful who won't change his spots. Yes, it's that little leopard there. Romantic feelings, all week revealed, and that's coming later in this hour. Thanks for joining me on the show. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Please get in touch. Email me the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com. Is Labour's anti-Semitism problem now totally out of control? We've seen protests outside Tobias Ellwood's house, the MP, the Conservative. The real fears for safety. Is it going too far? Can this be sorted out? But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story from the GB newsroom today. The rate of inflation remains at 4%, the same as December last year, despite economic forecasters predicting a rise. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found that food prices fell on a monthly basis for the first time since September 2021. But Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the figures, saying Conservatives can't fix the economy because they're the reason it's broken. But the Prime Minister insisted the UK economy had turned a corner. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, agreed, though, more needs to be done.
Inflation never falls in a straight line, and although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%, and we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates. So this is a time to stick to a plan that is clearly working, but we need to make sure that we really get to that end point of inflation at 2%.
Meanwhile, political pressure is mounting on Sir Keir Starmer after a second Labour candidate was suspended from the party following accusations of anti-Semitism. Graham Jones allegedly questioned British people who volunteer to fight with the Israeli Defence Forces, saying they should be locked up. It comes a day after Labour withdrew support for the party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, Azhar Ali, after he suggested Israel had taken the October the 7th Hamas assault as a pretext to invade Gaza. Sir Keir vowed yesterday that his party had changed under his rule. And a London theatre has banned a comedian from performing after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of a show. The comedian, Paul Curry, presented both the Ukrainian and Palestinian flag to the audience. He's been accused of encouraging the crowd to chant and shout at an Israeli ticket holder after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. Soho Theatre in central London has apologised and says it's looking into the incident. There are reports Paul Curry's next show could be cancelled. The audience member, Laia Havaitan, told GB News he felt excluded.
In the last 5 minutes of his show, since he produced those two flags, I was taken immediately out of the show. In my head, I was...
You felt excluded?
Yeah, excluded, and just in my mind, I was just thinking about how unfair this comparison is. I just really didn't agree with that statement.
Well, travellers are set to face more disruption next month as train drivers walk out and issue an overtime ban. Northern and LNER drivers are taking the action in a separate row to the ongoing national pay dispute. Meanwhile, train drivers at Chiltern, C2C, East Midlands, Northern and TransPennine have all voted to continue with their strikes. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the union is willing, though, to talk about a revised pay offer. Now some news reaching us from central London, where 9 people, including 6 police officers, have been taken to hospital after a collision between a double-decker bus and a police van. It happened in South London. We understand one officer had to be rescued by firefighters after being trapped inside the police vehicle. The Met are saying at this stage those involved in the crash aren't believed to be in a life-threatening condition. Now, 18 out of 31 NATO countries, according to its chief, are on track to meet the 2% military spending target. Jens Stoltenberg was speaking at a conference where he says overall spending is set for another record year. And that comes as Russia's fully fledged war against Ukraine enters its 3rd year. He also says NATO's European states will invest a combined total of around $302 billion in defence this year. The comments come as British troops departed Southampton yesterday, heading for Poland to take part in the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War to demonstrate and test the alliance's capabilities. Here at home, crossbow owners could face police checks under government plans to stop the weapons being used in violent attacks. It comes after convicted stalker Bryce Hodgson was shot dead by police last month after he broke into a London home armed with weapons, including a crossbow. There's currently no registration system for owning a crossbow and no need for a licence. We're told today that shoplifting has hit a record high. That's according to the British Retail Consortium, with almost 17 million incidents recorded last year. That's more than double compared to the year before, which was 8 million. The amount lost to shops because of shoplifting has cost retailers £1.8 billion, a record sum, and the first time it has surpassed the £1 billion mark. Violence and abuse against shop workers also spiked last year, with around 1,300 incidents every day. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper calls the figures shocking and describes the escalation as a failure of law and order. Lions at Whipsnade Zoo have been enjoying a perfect Valentine's treat as the public has been showering them with scented gifts. If you're watching on TV, take a look at this. The zoo asked people to donate their unused fragrances, which were sprayed onto sacks filled with straw or on trees to create enticing scent trails. Zookeepers say the smell of perfumes and aftershaves enhances the lions' sensory experiences and encourages them to explore, as you can see from the way they're rubbing their faces against them. For the very latest news stories, sign up to GB News Alert. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now we start with the anti-Semitism crisis that's engulfed the Labour Party. So Keir Starmer has now ditched 2 parliamentary candidates due to alleged anti-Semitic comments, and The Telegraph says the party is being pressured to investigate a further 5 more candidates. Yesterday, Labour suspended former MP Graham Jones, who's been selected to stand for the seat of Hyndburn near Blackburn at the next general election. Jones made a derogatory comment about Israel at a meeting after Hamas's attacks on October the 7th. And a day earlier, Labour withdrew its support for the party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, Azhar Ali, after he made anti-Semitic remarks at the very same meeting. Well, to discuss this fireballing crisis now, I'm joined by our political editor in the studio, Chris Tuffer. Chris, it just seems to be going on and on and on. Is this a case now of Sir Keir Starmer playing whack-a-mole? Wherever he looks, there seems to be anti-Semitism bubbling up.
What's happened is they haven't gripped it, the Labour Party. These first issues emerged about Azhar Ali in the Mail on Sunday on Saturday night. Then they decided to back him. So Keir Starmer said he wanted to back him, but Lisa Nandy appeared in an event with Mr Ali, a campaigning rally with the Labour Party on Sunday. On Monday, we had other senior figures from the party supporting Nick Thomas-Symonds came out, notably Pat McFadden. By Monday night, they dropped him. And then that's because more remarks emerged from the event talked about in the Mail, but from last October about those attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. And then something else happened overnight. Graham Jones, the candidate for Hyndburn, the former Labour MP 2010 to 2019, he was heard on the tape of that same event using expletive to describe Israel. Now, there's a debate about whether what he said was actually anti-Semitic. Ed Balls, a former Labour Shadow Chancellor, he says he thinks it's not anti-Semitic. It's to say effing Israel because it's a criticism on foreign policy. But the line is when it comes to attacking groups, Jewish groups in this country, against criticising Israel and its foreign policy approach towards what's happening maybe in Gaza or elsewhere. Mr. Ball said, interestingly, he said he knows Graham Jones well. He's not a Corbynite, not hard left, and not anti-Israel. He's criticising what's happened in a foreign policy situation. So for me, the suspension of Graham Jones adds to the crisis around the party, but is different to what Azhar Ali said, and of course he now regrets those remarks.
OK, a different perspective on this. Joining us now is a spokesperson at Jewish Voice for Labour, Naomi Winborn-Idrissi. Welcome to the show, Naomi. Seems to be another the Palestine problem once again resurfacing to haunt Sir Keir Starmer. Do you think Labour has an anti-Semitism problem?
That's a very interesting way of putting it. I think Labour has a problem identifying what anti-Semitism is. And as your last contributor just pointed out, there is a big question. Where do we cross the line from talking about Israel in a pejorative or critical way and actually attacking Jewish people? Now, I think a lot, nearly all, of what is being described these days as anti-Semitic or offensive to Jews is nothing to do with anything that is genuinely hurtful or threatening or dangerous to Jewish people. I feel less safe because of the hysteria and the attempts to sort of throw out anybody who's remotely sympathetic to Palestine or critical of Israel from the party. I feel alarmed about that, because people think that Jews are people who can't bear debate and discussion about one of the biggest issues in the world at the moment, i.e. what I view as what the International Court of Justice says may plausibly be genocide. We should be able to discuss that, and Keir Starmer is doing the Labour Party no favours by engaging in a sort of ham-fisted purge, an on-off purge against some people and not other people at different times. It's not a good look. And in Rochdale, when it's going to give alternative candidates a look in now, all over the country, there are people standing as independents against Labour because they're so horrified at the lack of opposition to the Tory position on Gaza and Israel.
But Naomi, surely Sir Keir Starmer had to act. Azir Ali basically said that Israel lowered its defences deliberately. So Hamas attacked, terrorists came over the border, allowing then Israel to fight back. I mean, that's not anti-Semitism. What is?
Well, it's certainly anti-Israel, and it was ham-fisted and inept of him, because to say that Israel positively allowed that horrendous attack to take place is, I think, wrong. However, the Israeli state did ignore clear signs, which is why many Israelis are so furious with Netanyahu. So it's a kind of a bit of a fine line. If it's inept, and if the Labour Party believes that somebody with that lack of judgment doesn't deserve to be a candidate, well, fine. But to turn it into a mass hysterical nationwide panic, which makes Jews feel afraid when they do not need to.
But Naomi, Jews are feeling very afraid nationwide. We speak to them all the time on this show. There's been a 700% boom in anti-Semitic crimes since October the 7th. We've seen Conservative MPs have their officers firebombed. We've seen death threats going out. And undeniably, this activity seems to be inexorably linked to the hard left within the Labour Party oftentimes, Naomi.
This is where you're really going completely wrong. The threat to Jews is real, as the threat to all racialized minority communities is real, and it comes mainly from the very far right. And even those MPs who've claimed that they are subjected to horrendous anti-Semitic abuse, the people who've actually been charged and jailed in Louisiana Berger's case, for example, were far-right activists. So let's get this straight. The threat to Jewish people does not come from Jeremy Corbyn and his friends. I'm a Jewish person who was expelled from the Labour Party because I disagree with the line on anti-Semitism.
Naomi, I just want some clarity. So are you saying that the boom in anti-Semitism since October the 7th isn't driven by those who support Palestine? It's been driven by the hard right?
I think if there is real attack on Jewish people as Jews, not offensive remarks made about Israel that upset some people, because I don't think that is anti-Semitism, right? And lots of the offences that are put into the data as being anti-Semitic are not anti-Semitic. They are comments about Israel. Can we please make that distinction? It's not like daubing swastikas on cemeteries or something like awful things like that, which do happen. A lot of it is to do with Israel, and a lot of it is from the far right. And to suggest that left-wing people like me, a Jewish woman, are threatening to other Jews is ridiculous. We're in a moral panic, and we have been for a couple of years now, and it is dangerous to Jews. If the normal population sees Jews shutting down discussion, throwing people out of jobs because they say something uncomplimentary about Israel, acting as gatekeepers for what may be part of the public discourse, Martin. I mean, you wouldn't like it, would you, if you were told, oh, my goodness, I hear that you said something a little bit uncomplimentary about Mark Regev the other day. That's the former Israeli ambassador to this country, now a spokesman for Netanyahu. I think that means that you're an anti-Semite.
My point is people calling for jihad on the streets of London, people smashing windows that belong to Jewish shop owners, Jewish children being afraid to wear their insignia on their blazers to school. This isn't being driven by the hard right. This has happened since October the 7th.
Look, Jews are genuinely frightened. Jews have been made to be frightened over the last, not just since October the 7th, going back to... strangely enough, when a certain section of the Labour Party found it expedient to start attacking Jeremy Corbyn. and we started to be told that there are these terrible sections of people on the left in the Labour Party out to get Jews. I've been canvassing for the Labour Party before I was expelled from it, and had to discuss with Jewish people genuinely hurt, genuinely upset, genuinely worried, because the news was full of lies about the extent of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. You have generated fear and panic, and it is so unfair to Jewish people to make that happen. And it's unfair to everybody else, because nobody can now discuss the genuine crisis that's going on worldwide about Israel, Palestine, Zionism. How do we deal with what is a genocide, in my view, and the International Court of Justice is looking at that now. We can't talk about it now because people just shriek anti-Semitism. If there is real racial crime against Jews, of course it has to be dealt with, as it does against Muslims and black people and Gypsy Roma traveller people and gay people and so on and so on. I think we have to get some perspective here. This is hysteria. The Labour Party is tearing itself apart because of a misapplication of the idea of what anti-Semitism is.
OK, we have to leave it there. Naomi Winborn Idrissi, Jewish Voice for Labour. Thank you very much. It's worth pointing out, though, there are only two political parties that have ever been investigated for racism in the UK. And that is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party and the BNP. So let's just think about that.
Hysteria.
Well, it's investigations by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. It's not hysteria. It's actual cases that were put forward. Anyway, here are the candidates standing in the Rochdale by-election. They are Azir Ali, Independent, Mark Coleman, Independent, Simon Danjuk, Reform UK, Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat, Paul Ellison, Conservative, George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain, Michael Howarth, Independent, William Howarth, Independent, Guy Otten, the Green Party, Raven Rodent Subordinate, Official Monster Raving Looney, and David Tully, Independent. Well, we'll have lots more on Labour's anti-Semitism crisis at 5 o'clock, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country. Time now for the Great British Giveaway, and you really could be our next winner with £18,000 in cash from us. You fancy getting your claws on that? Well, here's all the details that you need to enter.
This is your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. And if you're thinking, I'd never win something like that, listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last Great British Giveaway.
Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
You're joking. That's brilliant news.
For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Great stuff. Now, a day before two crucial by-elections, there's finally been some good news for Rishi Sunak on the financial front. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in The Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:23. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll talk about Harry and Meghan's new website, where there's 950 words boasting about their own achievements, but they don't even mention the royal family. It's all about the Sussexes. Now, there was some good news for Rishi Sunak today as inflation finally didn't rise. It was widely expected that inflation would go up in January, but it remained stable at 4%. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says their plan is working.
Inflation never falls in a straight line, and although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%, and we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates. So this is a time to stick to a plan that is clearly working, but we need to make sure that we really get to that end point of inflation at 2%. It's clearly welcome that in a cost of living crisis, wages are going up by faster than inflation. But what we want is for that to happen on a sustained basis. And that means getting inflation lower than it is today. It's still too high at 4%. We need it to be back down at 2%. And then we can be confident that as wages grow, it won't be inflationary. And that's why we need to stick to our plan.
So companies need to show restraint?
Well, what we need to do is to make sure that we don't do anything that compromises the battle against inflation. It's still too high at 4%. We need it to be down at 2%. Then interest rates can come down, and we won't have to worry about the pressure from wage rises.
Well, Jeremy Hunt's happy, but what about our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who joins me now? Liam, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. So, they remained stable as you predicted, inflation. Is this crumbs of comfort or thin gruel?
I think Downing Street's done quite a good job in expectations management, if I may say so. Martin, Jeremy Hunt's been saying inflation doesn't fall in a straight line pretty much daily for the last 2 weeks, when it became clear to those of us watching closely that inflation would probably be flat or even go up this month. In December, of course, inflation went up to 4% from 3.9% in November. It stayed at 4% in January. That's still double the Bank of England's target. of 2%. But because Downing Street's been saying, oh, my God, it might go up, we're all saying, oh, crikey, it's good. It was only flat. Jeremy Hunt, to be fair to him, is right. Inflation doesn't fall in a straight line, but we are clearly on a downward trend. As recently as the end of 2022, inflation was at a 40-year high, Martin, of over 11%. It's now 4%, as I said. Within that 4%, food inflation is still at 7%. Food prices did come down between December and January. That's why some people were referring to lower food prices. That's month on month. Year on year, though, compared to January 2023, food prices are up by 7%. So food price inflation is actually dragging up the overall level of inflation because it's higher in the overall level of inflation. And of course, poorer households spend disproportionately more of their money on food, so they feel inflation's punishing impact more heavily on their households. Within the inflation number, transport inflation actually went negative in January. What does that mean? That means for when it comes to transport, particularly petrol and diesel costs, prices are actually lower in January 2024 than 2023, largely because oil prices have come down a fair bit. So it's a mixed picture, but inflation is steady at 4%. Because inflation isn't coming down, I don't think there's any chance now that the Bank of England is going to lower interest rates when the Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economists who make interest rate decisions, when they meet on the 21st of March. So I do think we've got at least 1 to 2 more months of base rates at 5.25%. But as speculation builds, and I think the next inflation number for February will definitely be down quite heavily, as expectations build that inflation is falling and interest rates are going to fall from the Bank of England, commercial interest rates set by mortgage companies, loan companies, they will start coming down anyway, even before the Bank of England lowers rates. That's already happening. That's why the base rate's 5.25%, but you can get a mortgage for a lot less than that these days because a mortgage is over many years and they are driven by expectations of where rates will be on average over that long lending period. So tomorrow we've got another big inflation number coming out. We've got the GDP number coming out at 7 a.m. I'll be in the studio as ever with Ellie and Eamon. Interesting that the Tories, they've really hung their hat on an election strategy of waiting for the next election, waiting for interest rates to come down, waiting for tax cuts to happen, waiting for the economy to pick up and escape the cost of living crisis, escape the clutches of lockdown, waiting for a kind of economic feel-good factor. But how ironic would it be for Rishi Sunak in particular, who's got these 2 really awkward by-elections in Kingsdown, in South Gloucestershire and Wellingborough in Northants tomorrow. How awkward would it be for him if the very first really big domestic economic headline of the year, as voters go to the polls, is that Britain entered recession? It's not a good look.
Yeah, and that could well happen. What's your prediction on that front, Mystic Halligan? You normally get it right.
Well, I wrote in the Sunday Telegraph at the weekend that I do think it's more likely than not that the UK did go into recession at the back end of last year. A recession, of course, is 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. We know that the economy shrunk July, August, September. That's the 3rd quarter last year. It shrunk just by 0.1%, by 1/10 of 1%. That's a tiny amount in a, £2 trillion economy. And it may be that there was another very, very tiny 0.1% slowdown in the final quarter of last year, October, November, December. That's 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. It would be the shallowest possible recession that you could have, but it would still cross the line into recession. That the dreaded R word would still be linked to this Conservative government, a government that is really trying to paint itself as, if not economically competent, then certainly less economically incompetent than their Labour rivals and the potential government in waiting. So I do think we could see numbers tomorrow morning saying that the UK went into recession at the back end of last year, which would be ironic because GDP numbers, they're backward-looking by definition. So far this year, January, the first couple of weeks of February, the survey data that I look at, the unofficial data that often preempts what the official data is going to say in a few months' time, has actually been pretty good. There are signs of life in this economy. Manufacturers' order books are growing. Consumer confidence is rising. Inward investment is happening. off the back of the notion that inflation's falling, the cost of living squeeze is easing, and interest rates are soon going to be coming down. So there are signs of real economic life in this economy, but as ever, the economic data is always the last to know.
Superb. Liam Halligan, always on the money. Thank you very much for that expert summary. And there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. I've got the amazing story of the leopard at an English zoo who's proving a huge hit on a dating app for animals. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour: political pressure is mounting on Sir Keir Starmer over the Labour Party's culture following fresh allegations of anti-Semitism. It's after Graham Jones became the second candidate to be suspended from the party. He was reportedly recorded saying British people who volunteer to fight with the Israeli Defence Forces should be locked up. And that came a day after Labour withdrew support for the party's Rochdale by-election candidate, Azhar Ali, after he suggested Israel had taken the October the 7th Hamas attack as a pretext to invade Gaza. And a London theatre has banned a comedian from performing after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of a show. Paul Curry's been accused of encouraging the crowd to chant and shout at an Israeli ticket holder after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. London's Soho Theatre has apologised and says it is looking into the incident. The rate of inflation remains at 4% today, the same as December last year, despite economic forecasters predicting a rise. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found that food prices fell on a monthly basis for the first time since September 2021. The Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the figure, though, saying Conservatives can't fix the economy because they're the reason it's broken. And crossbow owners could face police checks under government plans to stop the weapons being used in violent attacks. It comes after convicted stalker Bryce Hodgson was shot dead by police last month after he broke into a London home armed with weapons, including a crossbow. There are currently no registration systems in place for owning a crossbow and no need for a licence. Those are the latest top stories. For more details, sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or head to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, Meghan's biography on a new website mentions her support for gender equality and human rights. But guess what? It doesn't even mention the royal family at all. It's all about Meghan. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's News Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under And of course, the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. At 5 o'clock, I'll have the latest on the anti-Semitism crisis that's now engulfing the Labour Party. But before that, Harry and Meghan have failed to mention the royal family across 950 words, listing their own achievements on their new personal website. Meghan's biography even talks about her advocacy for gender equality and human rights. Well, of course it does. It's even been reported they didn't consult the royals before they launched their revamped website on Monday. Harry and Meghan have kept their titles as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and in fact, the website address is sussex.com. Well, let's speak now to GB News' royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Cameron, here we go again. It's all about the Sussexes, and it has to be said, the website's biography details of themselves read like a gushing work of fiction.
And the problem is, Martin, of course, is distracting from the reason that Harry and Meghan have flown to Canada today, which is for the one-year countdown to the Invictus Games. The reason I mention that is because Prince Harry's biography claims he is an environmental campaigner. Guess what kind of mode of transport they flew to Canada in?
Private jet?
Correct. 2 private jet flights they have taken, Martin. So that has distracted from the event itself. Of course, very worthy event that Prince Harry set up to support veterans, a kind of Olympic-style event. But then the other thing is this whole row about whether or not they are now cashing in on their royal status. Harry and Meghan's team would say that they are the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. They have a right to use those titles. It's their legal titles. But the problem is, in 2020, at this so-called Sandringham summit, when they were thrashing out how they were going to be members of the royal family without being working royals, they agreed that they would not use their royal status to make money. And the line appears to be blurring here. We've got the royal crest, Meghan's royal crest, on the front page of this new website. Their titles are mentioned, and their children's titles are mentioned. Prince Harry and... not Prince Harry, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. But Meghan has hit back in the last few hours. She's released a statement, a very subtle statement, talking about the website's creator, saying that there is a reason I have worked with Ryan and the talented team at Article for a decade. Their attention to detail, their creativity and care, and the thoughtful approach to design, as well as to the user experience. They're not just designers, they are collaborators who elevate your ideas into visual identities. They're a very special company, plus they're Canadians, so I'm a fan. The same website designers created Meghan's lifestyle blog, The Tig, before she married Prince Harry. And of course, Meghan spent many years in Canada filming Suits. So clearly, Meghan is very pleased with the website. But it's interesting because it's Meghan's crest. Meghan's biography is longer than Prince Harry's. So it's all a little bit mismatched. It's unbalanced.
Cameron, it's an absolute word salad of wellness, narcissism and self-reverence. And I've got a simple question. Can you be a princess and a feminist? Everyone's a feminist these days. Well, I mean, I'm not. But can you be a feminist and your raison d'etre is to marry a prince and never have to work again?
Well, if you look at the work that Meghan did when she was a member of the royal family, which she very much highlights in the biography in the new website, she launched the cookbook supporting Grenfell victims, very worthy. She also became a patron of SmartWorks, which is a charity in the UK which supports women get into the workplace and build confidence. What it doesn't mention, and what a lot of people are scratching their heads over today, is that what has Meghan or indeed Harry done, apart from the Invictus Games, to make people's lives better on either side of the Atlantic, having stepped back as working members of the royal family? And that is the big challenge for It's trying to get back on that philanthropic work ethic rather than complaining about the fact that they are members of the royal family, which clearly has not done them any favours in the ratings.
OK, putting the Sussexes to one side if we could. I know that's difficult for them to do. What about the King's health, the important stuff, Cameron? How's Charles getting on?
Yes, so King Charles left London this morning or early this afternoon. It's understood he was receiving further treatment following his cancer diagnosis. He was pictured leaving Clarence House with his private secretary, Clive Alderton, in his state Bentley. It's the same car you see on your screens now. And you can see that they are massive windows. King Charles clearly wants to be seen, and he wants to get that message of reassurance out there. Buckingham Palace are not going to provide a running commentary about the King's health or the treatment he's receiving, but I think we can take comfort in the fact that he clearly looks pretty well here, considering the fact he's got a cancer diagnosis, and he's well enough to be photographed and looks relatively happy. So he's back in Sandringham this afternoon, resting and recuperating, and he's very much carrying on his work as monarch behind the scenes.
Superb stuff. Cameron Walker, thank you as ever. An excellent update. Brilliant. Now, if you're hoping to get a takeaway delivered on Valentine's Day, like Cameron there, you might be disappointed because delivery riders that work for food ordering platforms are going on strike today. They're all at it. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:46. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now at 5 o'clock, I'll have the latest on the anti-Semitism crisis that's simply engulfing the Labour Party. But before that, takeaway delivery riders that work for food ordering platforms such as Deliveroo, Just Eat and Uber Eats are on strike today. The action is to highlight the issue of pay and conditions. And many of the drivers and riders are classified as self-employed, so the platforms are not obliged to pay them the national living wage. Well, joining us now is GB News' national reporter Theo Chikomba. Theo, the delivery boys and girls going on strike. What's the latest?
They are indeed. It's probably bad news for people who are celebrating Valentine's Day today, as from 5 o'clock today until 10 o'clock, you won't be able to get those deliveries as you normally would do during that time period. And what we are expecting on this road here, just outside McDonald's, hundreds of delivery riders will be congregating here as part of this strike action, which has been led by Delivery Job UK, a grassroots movement which has been spearheading this. And they say simply that the pay and conditions aren't good enough. Now, in terms of the money that they get, it depends on the job. Now, if someone orders something, they can get between £2.40 to around £4.80, depending on the company they work for. There are many options like Deliveroo, Just Eat and many others which operate in the city and towns across the UK. But they're saying a huge chunk of that, around 80%, is taken by the company. So it leaves them with not much money. I spoke to one gentleman today and he was saying if you're having to go 5 miles, by the time you go to the restaurant, pick up food and then deliver it and go to the next job, you simply haven't made that money that you would have made if you were on the national minimum living wage, particularly here in the city where things are more expensive and they have been in recent years because of the cost of living crisis. And just a few moments ago, we did speak to a driver who's just actually popped off to one of her last jobs, and she's saying, I've actually got a new job and this is going to be one of my last days because simply I can't live on this pay. And she's been working here for around 6 years in the Notting Hill area. So they will be congregating here, hundreds of them we're expecting to see, and we'll be speaking to them to hear about their concerns. We have also heard from the companies at question here, Deliveroo, Just Eat and some of the others, and they're saying they do take into consideration the concerns that their staff have, even though they are self-employed, and they ensure that they have time off, for example, when they have children, training and those kind of things. But what we're hearing from staff, though, simply isn't good enough, and they want at least a minimum of £5 when they are making deliveries.
Thank you, Theo Chikomba. And by the way, a Deliveroo rider just whizzed past your shoulder there, so at least one of them is working. Thank you, Theo Chikomba. And I don't know about you, I don't think it's very romantic to rely on a takeaway being delivered. I cooked my missus tonight a delicious roast pork. Trouble is, she's vegetarian. Now, in case you haven't noticed, it's Valentine's Day. And I'll be honest, I couldn't care less. I can't stand the day. I think it's one of the worst days of the year. But anyway, however, I did enjoy this story when I saw it this morning. And that's this. A leopard at Dartmoor Zoo is proving a huge hit on a dating app for animals. Frodo is looking for love as part of a breeding programme designed to increase the numbers of the endangered species. Marvellous stuff. And our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody has this story.
This is Fredo, species Amur leopard, place of birth Estonia. Likes going out for dinner, exploring nature, but equally happy with a Netflix and chill.
He is a hit. He's got some likes.
Many people swiping right.
I think they're swiping. Yeah, is it right? You swipe for the is a good one. Yeah, he's definitely got some right swipes.
They're calling it the dating site for animals. You've heard of Grindr and Tinder. Well, this is ZIMS, Zoological Information Management System, to give it its unromantic title. All zoo animals have a profile, 2 million from about 25,000 species. Though according to Dartmoor Zoo boss Benjamin Mee, their profiles can be a bit too reliant on facts, not too many selfies, and the algorithms can be brutal.
You can't have any kind of genetic faults with that animal. They can't be in the slightest bit related to their partner or have any known defects. So all that kind of genetic sifting is done by the stud book, and then through the dating site, the eligible girls are picked, and one of them will be selected. And ideally, it'll be someone, it'll be an animal from nearby, so we don't have to go through the enormous process of bringing him in from Europe, as we did with Fredo.
It's part of a breeding programme run by the zoo with the aim of reintroducing Amur leopards to the wild. There are just 140 of them left in the wild and less than 300 in European zoos. They're critically endangered, so the pressure's on for Fredo to perform on his first date.
Usually there'll be a little bit of a kerfuffle, and usually the female will submit, lie down on her back, and there's a bit of hissing, and then that's all established.
Right now, Fredo can't accom. The zoo needs to raise funds to build him a love nest where his girlfriend can give birth. As soon as it's up and running, it's game on for a bit of How's Your Father? And it won't be long, the zoo hopes, before we hear the pitter-patter of tiny paws, before Fredo's girlfriend blocks him and we start the whole process again. It's a tough life. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Well, there's me. I said I didn't like Valentine's Day, and even that story has warmed my old cockles. Defrosted my old glacial heart. Lovely stuff. Look, I asked you for your views earlier on in the show, gbviews@gbnews.com, and they've been coming in en masse. You've been particularly getting motivated and invigorated on this Valentine's Day by Labour's anti-Semitism problem. Loads and loads of you have messaged in. Let's read a few of those out now. John says this: Starmer is playing whack-a-mole within his own party at the moment with regards to anti-Semitism. And that's a good point, John. We said that earlier on. It seems that whenever he stamps out some anti-Semitism, and to his credit, he has been quick to respond, another problem creeps up, several more under investigation. And I was at the pro-Palestine march the other night at Downing Street, it's just over the way here, on my way home. And I was surrounded by people very quickly, all of the political left persuasion, and they seem to be very, very dogmatic. It's not just the party itself, it's a whole generation, I believe, who seems to have been brought up on this indoctrination that Israel is the root of all evil. And in fact, so is Britain in its support, and we've seen that spilling over into protests outside MP's house. That's a dangerous phenomenon that surely needs to be stopped. Now, Martin has said this: if Mr Starmer had not backed Jeremy Corbyn to the hilt for leader and resigned back then he would have far more credence. As it happens now, he does not have a leg to stand on. And David says this: the last time Labour were in power, everyone had to be extra careful regarding comments on immigration, or you were labelled a racist. And I pointed out earlier on that only two political parties in the UK have ever been investigated for racism by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and it's the Labour Party and BNP. That's not very good company to be in. Can Starmer put these fires out this time? That's the huge challenge he has ahead of him. I'm sure this will roll through to by-elections. Will it affect those results? We'll have to wait and see. We'll have all of the coverage here on GB News, of course, on that. Now, the Home Office has built up a stock of 16,000 properties to house asylum seekers, despite chronic shortages across the UK of homes for young people and families. That's a £4 billion industry, and don't forget, you're paying for it. We'll have all that after this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. There'll be further rain to come for some of us, but for many of us it'll be a cloudy afternoon and evening with that mild air persisting, so it'll stay very close and muggy through this evening and overnight. That mild air is pushing north through the afternoon and it will reach the far north of Scotland, where they have been escaping much of the wet weather so far today. So a cloudy night to come, plenty of rain arriving as well from the south and west. It'll push up to the northeast, and then that's where it will sit through the evening, covering much of Scotland through much of the night, so some heavy bursts of rain to come here. Further south, though, it should dry out by the morning. However, if you are over close to any higher ground or close to coastal areas, it'll be quite a misty morning once again, and another very mild start to the day. Tomorrow, there'll be some quite persistent rain across parts of South Wales and the southwest. There's been quite a lot of rainfall already here so far this month, so there are some rain warnings in force for here, as well as some areas of the Midlands as well. So we could see some travel disruption in these areas. But for many of us, we will see some further rainfall through Thursday. It's only in the southeast where we will escape the rain through much of the day, and it will be a mild afternoon there. That rain will clear away through Friday morning to leave many of us with a much brighter and drier day. So a bit of an improvement to come on Friday, some sunny spells by the afternoon, but there will be some further rain through Saturday evening and into Sunday. See you later on.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation. But yours very much built on confidence and sources and fact. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book. But when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous their riposte to any given situation in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, there have been a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare. You see time and again that they feel that they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, it's on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over twice that time.
Can you envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Coming up, there's the latest on Labour's anti-Semitism crisis. Sir Keir Starmer's now dumped 2 election candidates, but now apparently he's under further pressure to investigate 5 more. Also, the government's bought up thousands of homes for asylum seekers, even though we're in the midst of a housing crisis with more than 1 million on the council house waiting list. 16,000 homes coughed up, and it's cost £4 billion for the taxpayer so far, and you're paying for it all. And another day and more stories of woke culture circling our armed forces. This time it's climate change and environmentally friendly paint that's high on the agenda, like they've got nothing else to worry about. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Thanks for joining me on the show. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Please get in touch if anything burning questions you want to get out there. gbviews@gbnews.com. We've had hundreds and hundreds of emails so far about the Labour Party and the anti-Semitic crisis enveloping it. Let us know your thoughts. And also 16,000 homes hoovered up by the government to be given out for free to asylum seekers. Meanwhile, housing lists for resident Brits are at breaking point. And what about housing our own homeless and veterans first? Please get in touch on that. Loads to talk about in the next hour. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom today is that political pressure is mounting on Sir Keir Starmer following fresh allegations of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. It's after Graham Jones became the second candidate to be dropped by Labour. He was reportedly recorded saying British people who volunteer to fight with the Israeli Defence Forces should be locked up. And that came a day after Labour withdrew support for the party's Rochdale by-election candidate, Azhar Ali, after he suggested Israel had taken the October Hamas attacks as a pretext to invade Gaza. And a London theatre has banned a comedian from performing after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of a show. Paul Curry presented both a Ukrainian and Palestinian flag to his audience. He's been accused of encouraging the crowd to chant and shout at an Israeli ticket holder after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. Soho Theatre in central London has apologised and said it's looking into the incident. There are reports Paul Curry's next show could be cancelled. The audience member, Layahav Aitan, told GB News he felt excluded.
You know, in the last 5 minutes of his show, since he produced those 2 flags, like, I was taken immediately out of the show. Like, in my head, I was...
You felt excluded?
Yeah, excluded, and just in my mind, I was just, like, thinking about how unfair this comparison is. I just really didn't agree with that statement.
Economic news, and the rate of inflation remains at 4% today, the same as December last year. That's despite economic forecasters predicting a rise. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found that food prices did fall on a monthly basis for the first time since September 2021. But the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, criticised the figure, saying Conservatives can't fix the economy because they're the reason it's broken. The Prime Minister insisted the economy had turned a corner. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, agrees, though, more needs to be done.
Inflation never falls in a straight line, and although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%, and we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates. So this is a time to stick to a plan that is clearly working, but we need to make sure that we really get to that end point of inflation at 2%.
The Chancellor. Now, crossbow owners could face police checks under government plans to stop the weapons being used in violent attacks. It comes after convicted stalker Bryce Hodgson was shot dead by police last month after he broke into a London home armed with weapons, including a crossbow. There's currently no registration system for owning one and no need for a licence. Travellers are set for more disruption as train drivers from Northern and LNER plan to strike on the 1st of March and will introduce a 3-day ban on overtime. Workers at the two operators are walking out in a separate row to the national pay dispute. They say it's because working agreements aren't being honoured. ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan says he's fed up with the bad faith shown by companies. Meanwhile, train drivers at 5 other operators have also voted to continue their separate strikes in the coming months. Israeli strikes have hit villages across southern Lebanon, killing at least 4, including a woman and her 2 children. Israeli forces say the attack, potentially the largest since war in the region began, was in response to Hezbollah rocket fire, which killed a soldier. It comes as peace talks between Hamas and Israel have stalled. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying the terror group have presented no credible offer for a deal to get Israeli hostages back home. Meanwhile, 18 out of 31 NATO countries are on track to meet the group's 2% military spending target. The alliance's chief, Jens Stoltenberg, says overall spending is set for another record year. NATO's European states will invest a combined total of around £302 billion on defence this year, and that comes as Russia's war against Ukraine enters its 3rd year. Here at home, shoplifting has hit a record high, according to the British Retail Consortium, with almost 17 million incidents recorded last year. That's more than double compared to the year before, which was 8 million. The amount lost to shoplifting cost retailers around £1.8 billion, a record sum, and the first time it surpassed the £1 billion mark. Violence and abuse against shop workers has also spiked last year, with about 1,300 incidents, I should say correctly, a day. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has called the figures shocking, describing the escalation as a Conservative failure on law and order. Slightly brighter news for you to end this bulletin. It is Valentine's Day, and lions at Whipsnade Zoo have been enjoying a perfect Valentine's treat as the public has showered them with scented gifts. The zoo asked people to donate their unused fragrances, which were sprayed on sacks filled with straw or on tree stumps to create enticing scent trails. Zookeepers say the smell of perfumes and aftershaves enhances the lions' sensory experiences and encourages them to explore. Beautiful. For the very latest stories, sign up for GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen, or do go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, there's only one place to start, of course, and that's the anti-Semitism crisis that's now simply engulfing the Labour Party. So Keir Starmer has now ditched 2 parliamentary candidates due to alleged anti-Semitic comments. And The Telegraph now says that the party is being pressured to investigate a further 5 candidates. Yesterday, Labour suspended former MP Graham Jones, who'd been selected to stand for the seat of Hyndburn near Blackburn at the next general election. Jones made a derogatory comment about Israel at a meeting after Hamas's attacks on October the 7th. And of course, a day earlier, Labour withdrew its support for the party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election, Azhar Ali, after he made anti-Semitic remarks at the very same meeting. Well, to mull over this now, I'm joined by our political editor in the studio, Christopher Hope. Chris, the onward-going saga of anti-Semitism, it's having an impact. A poll is out this morning, a Savanta poll, showing a 7-point swing away from Labour. Would it have any impact, though, at the electoral booth? The polling station is the only place that matters.
Of course, and you're referring to by-elections tomorrow in Wellingborough and Kingswood, and of course looking forward into February 29th in Rochdale. Let's park those 3 by-elections and look at this poll. Savanta polled usual numbers of people representative of the population between February the 9th and the 11th. Those dates matter. Now, the polls found Labour down 5 points, Tories up 2 points, so the 7-point swing, 12-point differential between those two parties, polled before the issue with Mr. Ali in Rochdale really became apparent.
This was the U-turn on the 28 billion.
Correct. So we can only assume, and again, Chris Hopkins from Savannah says, don't read too much into one poll. Let's mark that. But though that poll there is about really the 28 billion U-turn. Last week's story was, in fact, this day last week, or tomorrow, 6 days, we were discussing the fact they dropped this plan to spend 28 billion on green projects in the back end of the next Parliament. That's the Labour Party. We had that briefing with Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. So the impact of this re-emergence of alleged anti-Semitism in Labour hasn't yet been felt in the polls.
And what's your kind of waters telling you? If there were to be another poll including this anti-Semitic blow-up, do you think there'd be a further downward poll for the Labour Party?
I think it's a big problem. The Tory party is clearly trying to show people that, you know, Richard Holden, the party chairman, sent out an email to supporters last night saying, are you surprised? Labour's changed, but as are Ali's comments, which he, of course, has taken back, but he did say them in a meeting in October last year after the 7th October attacks on Israel by Hamas, is proof of it. They're trying to make the most of this, showing that it hasn't changed. The point about Sir Keir Starmer is he's not Jeremy Corbyn. He's moved the party on to a space where anti-Semitism is not tolerated. Now, the Jewish Labour movement says today that there's no suggestion we're going back to that. Mike Katz says the idea in the bad old days of Corbyn is ludicrous. But the point is, if they can't manage this issue in opposition, how will they be in government?
And on that very point, earlier on the show, I spoke to Naomi Winborn Idrissi, who's a spokesperson for Jewish Voice for Labour.
Labour has a problem identifying what anti-Semitism is. And as your last contributor just pointed out, there is a big question. Where do we cross the line from talking about Israel in a pejorative or critical way and actually attacking Jewish people? Now, I think a lot, nearly all, of what is being described these days as anti-Semitic or offensive to Jews is nothing to do with anything that is genuinely hurtful or threatening or dangerous to Jewish people. I feel less safe because of the hysteria and the attempts to sort of throw out anybody who's remotely sympathetic to Palestine or critical of Israel from the party. I feel alarmed about that because people think that Jews are people who can't bear debate and discussion about one of the biggest issues in the world at the moment, i.e. what I view as what the International Court of Justice says may plausibly be genocide. We should be able to discuss that, and Keir Starmer is doing the Labour Party no favours by engaging in a sort of ham-fisted purge, an on-off purge against some people and not other people at different times. It's not a good look. And in Rochdale, well, it's going to give alternative candidates a look in now. All over the country, there are people standing as independents against Labour because they're so horrified at the lack of opposition to the Tory position on Gaza and Israel. The threat to Jews is real, as the threat to all racialized minority communities is real, and it comes mainly from the very far right. And even those MPs who've claimed that they are subjected to horrendous anti-Semitic abuse, the people who've actually been charged and jailed in Louisiana Berger's case, for example, were far-right activists. So let's get this straight. The threat to Jewish people does not come from Jeremy Corbyn and his friends. I'm a Jewish person who was expelled from the Labour Party because I disagree with the line on anti-Semitism.
OK, as you can see there, I was trying to get a word in at the end. If you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see that full debate with Naomi Winborn Idrissi. And I picked up, Chris, on her point, where she tried to pin this surge, a tidal wave of anti-Semitism since October the 7th, when Hamas invaded Israel, on the far right. To me, that's literally absurd. The tangible, quantifiable data is there. It doesn't match that point.
I think that's where she lost the audience, possibly. I think we must also respect Naomi for having experienced anti-Semitism herself, and she's been through that. She left Labour during the Corbyn years, so she has that experience. So it really is, it matters more to her than other people who aren't Jewish. Of course it does. But I think you can say it's a left and right problem. You can't pin it on the far right. That gives the left a free pass. Now, that isn't the case, and it is a left and right issue. But she would probably admit that, were she discussing it now, that it is a left and right issue. It's not just the far right, but But I think one wouldn't want to go where her point about criticising Israel and you can do that and not be anti-Semitic is a point made by Ed Balls, the former Shadow Chancellor. He says that Graham Jones, who has been suspended for saying effing Israel, he thinks that he is not an anti-Semitic individual.
OK, well, for a different take on this, I can now speak with political commentator Stephen Carlton-Wood. Stephen, welcome to the show. Stephen, this anti-Semitic crisis now seems to be rolling on and on and on. The big question is it over, or is it simply a game now of anti-Semitic whack-a-mole?
It's just the start, unfortunately, I would say. Just listening to Naomi Winberg's comments there, I was absolutely astounded at her stance on anti-Semitism, sort of apologising for the Labour Party and criticising Sir Keir Starmer. You can't roll over and die on something so important as this. Earlier on, over the last 12 months, I've got to know Ivan Lewis quite well, do a podcast with him occasionally, talking about all sorts of different issues. And now Ivan was kicked out of the Labour Party by Jeremy Corbyn and his crew for his stance because of their lack of action with anti-Semitism. So Naomi's slant on the whole thing against Ivan Lewis, who was a former minister under Tony Blair for 9 years, is very, very different. And Labour, and I think, obviously I'm completely different to Labour in the way they come across things, as I'm a Conservative commentator more than anything else. I think Keir Starmer's doing the right thing in his crackdown on this anti-Semitism. But the thing is, it's so widespread within the Labour Party, it's going to go on and on and on. And it's like a cancer within the Labour Party, and it goes very, very deep. And while you've got Naomi Winberg denying all these terrible traits and then pointing it to the right, it's actually an issue within the far left. And many people I meet within the far left are all pro-Palestine and so anti-Israel. And this is where the root of the problem lies.
Stephen, do you think also, I was struck, I've been on a couple of these pro-Palestine marches just to observe. I just like to get in the thick of it. I was the same on the Remainer marches. Do you think also, Chris is laughing here, I just like to get stuck in and see what's going on at ground level. And I'm struck by something else. There's a thread through the pro-Palestinian movement that's also very anti-British. What's your take on that?
Well, this is the problem with the left in this country. The left is so in denial about who we are and as a people. He sort of wants to crush what we all stand for and what our core beliefs are, and treat it as though it's some embarrassment about our past. This nation was the leading nation in the revolution with the what's it called now? The Industrial Revolution, that's the word I'm thinking about. We've got a lot to be proud of. And they sort of deny that and think, oh, well, it's a disgrace. Actually, we were the leaders in the world in doing away with racism, with slavery and things like that. So we've got a lot to be proud of, and we should never deny. I mean, there obviously is some bad things, but we go back a long, long way with our influence in the world. And I think it's something great to be proud of. And we recognise people's needs and differences a long time ago before the rest of the world. And we set the boundaries that we have today. So to deny what we were all a part of, I think it's a disgrace for the left to deny us that.
OK, superb stuff there. Thank you very much for joining us, political commentator Stephen Carlton-Wood, and also a big thank you to Chris Hope for being here the last few hours. Excellent as ever. Look forward to our next stint. Now, here are the candidates standing in that Rochdale by-election. Azir Ali, Independent. Mark Coleman, Independent. Simon Danjuk, Reform UK. Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat. Paul Ellison, Conservative. George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain. Michael Howarth, Independent. William Howarth, Independent. Guy Otten, Green Party. Raving Rodent Subordinate, official monster raving loony. David Tully, finally, Independent. And there's lots more on Labour's problems with anti-Semitism on our website. And you've helped to make it gbnews.com, the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much for all of your support. Now it's £5.19, and what would you do with an extra £1,500 each month for an entire year? Well, that could be you, because thanks to our great British giveaway is £18,000 in cold, hard cash. Tax-free is up for grabs, and here's how you could win all of that wonga.
There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won in the latest Great British Giveaway. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. Money to make each month just that little bit better. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Great stuff. Now, the Home Office has very kindly built up a stock of a whopping 16,000 properties for asylum seekers. And that's despite chronic shortages across the whole of the UK for homes for families and young people, let alone the homeless and veterans. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place. And to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had two run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjum Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:24. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, we'll be discussing the Royal Navy once again as they consider introducing compulsory climate change courses for all sailors. Now, hopefully that will help solve the retention and recruitment crisis in our armed forces. They'll be queuing up the Rainbow Brigade. Now, the Home Office has built up a stock of 16,000 properties to house asylum seekers, despite chronic shortages across the UK of homes for young people, families, veterans and the homeless. The Home Office have been offering landlords 5-year guaranteed full rent deals to take over the management of properties as they attempt to transfer asylum seekers out of hotels that cost £8 million a day, of course. Well, I can now speak with Russell Quirk, property expert on this. Russell, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. Another incident, Russell, of Britons being at the back of the queue. 16,000 properties hoovered up by the government at great cost to the taxpayer. Once again, people wondering who on earth comes first in this country.
Yeah, so if you're one of the 1.2 million people that are on the UK housing waiting list, generally sort of people that have paid into the system and that are deserving of that social housing, you can be you can understand the sympathy that people will have for them, given that they are being put to the back of the queue, as you put it, whereby asylum seekers are being prioritised. And of course, this is not just asylum seekers. Let's be really honest here, Martin. This is often those that are coming over on dinghies with no ID, not women, not children, 25-year-olds from Albania, for instance, not a war-torn country, by the way, who are then being given priority by these idiotic councils and this haphazard, wayward, incompetent government over and above the people that are paid into the tax system. This 16,000 homes, by the way, this is just the tip of the iceberg, Martin. So you've got 16,000 homes that have been stockpiled by the Home Office on a rental basis. The average rent, by the way, in the UK is about £1,000 per month. So the calculation just for this particular initiative means that we're still paying £500,000 per day to rent those 16,000 homes. So Rishi Sunak's ridiculous kind of prophecy, or his decision, his policy, the revelation that he was going to appeal to the masses by taking people as asylum seekers out of hotels and hostels, that then should be lauded as some kind of clever initiative that we should give him credit for. All he's done is then take rental houses away from people that have paid into the system. But the other thing, Martin, sorry, just quickly, is there are councils across the country, and I've got a huge list here, just very, very, very quickly. Winchester, Preston, North Norfolk, North Yorkshire, Waltham Forest, Portsmouth, Basingstoke. These local authorities are actually buying homes, so new and used homes, specifically for the purposes of housing asylum seekers. So this is taking stock away from first-time buyers that otherwise would be able to buy those homes, and stock away from renters who actually have very, very little choice right now as it is, because there's a housing shortage. This is a disgrace, Martin.
Yeah, and Russell, expert overview there. Serco, Clear Springs and Mears, the three contractor companies to do this, have been paid £4 billion, Russell, over 10 years to hoover up this housing. And the councils you touched upon there, Russell, I'm especially fascinated by what I see as a kind of refugees welcome mindset that seems to continually become a working class problem. When you look at the communities where the cheap housing is being hoovered up, top of the list, places like Hull, Bradford, Teesside. What then happens, Russell, is you create ghettos. You create ghettos where locals can't afford housing, ghettos where asylum seekers are dumped, nowhere near where the policymakers live, nowhere near Gary Lineker's place, nowhere near the politicians driving this through, and it becomes a working class problem dumped on those communities with no say whatsoever.
Yeah, no, indeed. And look, the Home Office and indeed these councils, they are buying masses of properties in the areas that you and I have just referenced. So, without any cultural assimilation, I think, as we would call it, dumping these people, often not knowing who they are, not forgetting that a lot of these so-called asylum seekers are dumping their ID over the side of the dinghy into the English Channel, and expecting that integration, that that neighbourhood dynamic to carry on without any issues. We've seen what's happened in asylum hostels and asylum hotels, where many have been set fire to. There have been all sorts of trouble. In fact, there's a statistic, Martin, that in the last 3 years, nearly 2,000 serious incidents of assault, arson and sexual offences have occurred within those asylum hotels and hostels by people that are seeking asylum. That's just going to be transferred further into our communities, into housing, whereby these people are going to be living next door to us and opposite us.
Yeah, and Russell, there's a case that we've been following very closely on GB News on my show, and that's 300 asylum seekers being dumped into luxury apartments in Farnborough. There's been a huge backlash by the locals, but oftentimes, Russell, these communities, they're not politically motivated, they're not integrated, there's very little social cohesion, and so, once again, it's foisted upon those communities with no say in the matter.
Yeah, and we all know what the answer here is. That's to either turn back the boats, frankly, or to repatriate those people that shouldn't be here. Particularly, the 45% or so that actually don't receive asylum. They're not even removed. So these are the people, the asylum seekers that have had failed asylum applications that are still housed at the taxpayer's expense. So you've not even got the issue around so-called legitimate asylum seekers, bearing in mind we accept more asylum applications than just about any other country in Europe, so we're pretty soft. Imagine being an economic migrant from Albania, a 25-year-old with his new iPhone 15 and his kind of, expensive trainers and tracksuit, jumping on that boat thinking, I've absolutely made it in life. Britain, no wonder they're trawling through all of these European countries to get to us. Not only is Britain going to welcome that person and probably grant them asylum, you're going to get a free house, not just a hotel room, but a free house, as well as benefits, education, NHS and so on. It really is an utter disgrace. The government could do something about it. Clearly, Rishi Sunak and the Home Office, the bureaucrats, the civil service in the Home Office, for some odd reason are deciding not to, against the will of the British people.
Russell Quirk, excellent, brilliant and yet slightly depressing analysis from you. Thank you very much for speaking out. As ever, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and I'll bring you the remarkable story of the hundreds of motorists who will be fined for speeding after a prankster put up a fake 50-mile-an-hour sign. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. Labour says there are strong checks on would-be MPs after a second Labour candidate was suspended following accusations of anti-Semitism. Former MP Graham Jones was reportedly recorded saying British people who volunteer to fight with the Israeli Defence Force should be locked up. His suspension came only a day after Labour was forced to withdraw its backing for another candidate. Azhar Ali, Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to root out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And a London theatre has banned a comedian from performing after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of a show. Paul Curry's been accused of encouraging the crowd to chant and shout at an Israeli ticket holder after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. London's Soho Theatre has apologised and said it's looking into the incident. And the rate of inflation remains at 4%, the same as December last year, despite economic forecasters predicting a rise. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found that food prices did fall on a monthly basis for the first time since September 2021. But the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, criticised the figure, saying Conservatives can't fix an economy that they have broken. And crossbow owners could face police checks under government plans to stop the weapons being used in violent attacks. It comes after convicted stalker Bryce Hodgson was shot dead by police last month after he broke into a London home armed with a crossbow. There's currently no registration system for owning one and no need for a licence. Those are the top stories. More background on all of them by signing up to GB News Alerts, by scanning the QR code on your screen, or simply by going to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And a quick Wednesday look at the numbers for you. The pound buying you $1.2559 and €1.1703. The price of gold is £1,586 and 4 pence an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed for the day today at 7,568 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now, we may be facing a recruitment crisis in our armed forces, but don't worry, because the Royal Navy is considering introducing compulsory climate change courses for all sailors. That'll put the fear of God into Putin, won't it? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:38. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, in a few minutes, I'll talk about the Metropolitan Police officer who threatened to arrest and fine a Christian preacher who was accused of a hate crime. But before that, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps warns a woke and extremist culture might infiltrate the British Army, well, it already has, after it was revealed that checks have been relaxed to promote diversity. It's been reported that women in the armed forces now apparently feel unsafe following these comments and labelled them as dangerous. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy are doing their bit because they're considering introducing compulsory climate change courses for sailors, while previously stating that ships will be painted with environmentally friendly paint. You couldn't make this stuff up, could you? Well, joining now is former British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Welcome to the show, Stuart. Always a pleasure. Here we are. Seems to be every single day we're talking about our woke army, our woke navy. Have we completely lost the plot? Sending sailors on climate change courses, and now female soldiers have been offended by words.
Well, I mean, it may look like that, certainly to the casual observer, and there, as ever, there's an element of truth in it. Just to put it into context, it was only 25 years ago, when I was still serving in a tank regiment in the British Army, that I wrote an article saying I couldn't see any reason why my tank crew should not include female members. And the editor of the magazine phoned me up and said he couldn't possibly publish it because the whole idea was preposterous. So in terms of women in the armed services, we've come a long way from there. But the whole sort of woke culture, if you want to put it that way, is having a sort of unsettling effect upon members of all three services at the moment. And looking at the climate issue, I think climate change is an unfortunate term. Climate fluctuation might be a more accurate description because the science is certainly not settled. But I think that as long as it's a broadly educational series of courses which explains to serving sailors and about climate change and its effects on the world, like, for example, the melting and refreezing of the ice caps, then I think it's an important thing. But we should see this against a background. In the least environmentally friendly activity known to mankind is warfare. And there's only so much you can do to get away from that.
But you have to ask, what has climate change got to do with the price of a bag of chips? If you're on a ship, and you're about to be dispatched to the Red Sea to fight Houthi rebels, isn't this just a question of ridiculously misplaced priorities?
Well, I think it's something that has to be taken into consideration. I mentioned the melting of the Arctic ice cap, which will eventually, if things continue the way they're going at the moment, allow the Chinese Navy, for example, direct access to the North Atlantic. And so I think we have to be aware of these things going on. And there have been well-documented problems with the Royal Navy's T-45 destroyers operating in warm waters, which is now being rectified by a hugely expensive sort of retrofit program. So I think that we have to be aware of these things. But I'll just come back to my point is that the whole idea of climate emergency or climate crisis is not settled science. We have to accept that the climate fluctuates, but whether it's all man-made is another thing altogether.
Do you think it's fair to say, though, this drive for diversity, we saw the RAF, for example, banning white men from applying for roles. Do you think this whole process is having a completely counterintuitive effect? And it's this: the people most likely to fight in our wars happen to be white working-class men and women, because that's the majority of our population, just about. And yet, if they're constantly demonised in this way, and it's all about diversity, then the fact of the matter is, by sheer metrics alone, those people will simply stop applying. They feel like they're not wanted.
Well, there is an element of not feeling wanted. The setting of quotas for various ethnic minority groups in terms of recruitment or promotion or anything like that is actually against the race relation law. And so that's why the RAF came so publicly unstuck on that one. We also have to acknowledge the fact that while ideally the armed forces should represent the society from which they recruit, that would mean that 52% of our armed forces would be women, which they patently obviously aren't. So I think we've got to get the balance right somewhere and make sure that those who wish to apply, no matter what background they come from, as long as they're up to the job and can pass selection, are selected. And whether they're white, red, green, female, gay, transgender or Martian is of no real concern, as long as they are capable of doing what the armed services are meant to do, and that is defend the realm and our citizens.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. As ever, former British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Thanks for joining us. Now, moving on, a Christian preacher was accused of a hate crime and threatened with arrest simply for singing outside a church. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right.
Growth.
And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you,
sure,
and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain,
but it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means 1 year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase, and that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951,
years,
whatever
right.
it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:47. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, a Met police officer recently threatened to arrest and fine a Christian preacher who was accused of a hate crime, coming just weeks after a gospel singer was threatened also with arrest over singing religious songs. The evangelist can be heard protesting with the police in the video. So why don't we have a quick watch of that now?
So there is a public
we need to have structure, otherwise you're speaking at the same time.
Well, right now you're speaking over her.
Right. So I'm saying, is she speaking or are you speaking?
Yes, you do. We both speaking. There is an element of
but I'm not speaking when she's speaking. We can walk away. Let's wait to be in the train.
Okay.
But
as long as you're not preaching over the megaphone.
You just mentioned, you just said just now.
Sir, for yourselves, for leaflets, for example, that does not fit under the public space protection order, even under the religious category for being able for freedom of speech. But obviously a crime has been committed, we need to investigate.
Okay.
Or do you want £100 fine? Okay. Because if you don't want that, we could deal with it in custody.
I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to ask one question.
I think you are, sir, trying to be rude.
I want to answer the question. Thank you, officer. Can I ask you the question? I'm not asking you the question. I'm asking you.
Okay, but you're aware that I can fine you for that.
I'm asking the question. One second.
Who you are.
1 second.
If you do not, I will arrest you for public space protection order breach.
1 second.
Do you have identification
I know you're
on
upset.
you?
1 second.
Well, 4 coppers sent to harass a preacher. Try and find a copper when you get mugged or robbed in London. Well, now I can speak with a consultant lawyer to the Christian Legal Centre, Michael Phillips. Michael, welcome to the show. Can we start, before we get into the absurdity of this, about the actual allegations, the homophobic incident? They say the missionary claims he was simply reading out a chapter of the Bible, John chapter 3, verse 16.
Well, there's no offence there. I mean, the problem is this, is that police officers that I meet day in, day out, they're often extremely ill-informed about the Public Order Act. And I watched a little bit more of that video before. And what the officer said is you commit an offence if harassment, alarm and distress is caused. And that is just not what the law says. What actually the law says is that if you threaten somebody, if you abuse somebody, and it may have that result, then you may have committed an offence. And once again, if you're not exercising your right to freedom of speech. But the officers always take this topsy-turvy approach to the law, whereby they say if somebody's upset, then there's a crime. And that is not the case. It is not the law. And unfortunately, this is just a systemic problem. It's not just, this is Uxbridge. We see it in Liverpool. We see it in Yorkshire. We see it across the country.
And Mike, a lot of people watching this might start to think that there's one rule for Christians and one rule for other faiths. After all, we often hear people shouting obscene things at pro-Palestine marches. The police simply turn a blind eye. They couldn't care less. And yet, routinely now, Michael, it seems Christians are specifically being singled out.
It's an extremely sad thing, because what we're seeing is that Harmony London is a client of ours, and that a couple of weeks or so ago she was told you cannot sing church songs outside the church without a license. It's complete and utter rubbish. But yet on that bit of Oxford Street, which is very near my office, where she often plays her music and people absolutely love it, then there are some people of other religions who are usually there on a very regular basis, who are not singing songs, they're not producing wonderful harmonies, and they've never been interfered with whatsoever. And one has to ask the question, why is this discriminatory behavior going on? And it has to stop, because people are afraid. You know, she was just going out there, she's singing these wonderful songs, you know, trying to lift people's spirits, and she gets harassed and bullied by these police officers, for not just for a couple of minutes that we see on the video, but it goes on and on and on. In fact, I think her encounter was 45 minutes. These preachers the other day, it went on for quite some time. And eventually what happens is somebody gets arrested and put into prison, albeit maybe only for 24 hours, and it sends a chilling effect to everybody else. Other people who maybe slightly maybe weaker disposition think, I'm not going to be doing that, because if you go out and you even sing a song, a police officer who may be ill-informed, doesn't know the law, is going to put me in a police cell overnight, and I just don't want to do that.
OK, Michael Phillips, consultant lawyer for the Christian Legal Centre, thank you very much for joining us. I don't know about you out there, folks, but it certainly feels to me that we are looking at two-tiered policing here. Why is it they're clamping down on Christians and yet turning a blind eye, for example, to those from the Muslim faith when they're shouting stuff on our streets? The police just seem to stand by. How does that make you feel? Please send me your comments, gbviews@gbnews.com. But quickly moving on, fake 50-mile-an-hour signs in South London have left hundreds of drivers with heavy speeding fines. Up to 500 motorists who've been using the A20 near Sidcup are now seeking to overturn their charges. TfL says the signs were put up by an unauthorised third party after they'd set the speed limit at 40 miles an hour. A little bit of fun here. Joining us now is the comedian Diane Spencer.
Diane, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Is this a bit of fun? You're counting to 5 there. How about counting to 50? 50 miles an hour, Diane. People are getting these tickets and they're being overturned, right? Because someone put a bogus sign up.
I'm so glad that these tickets are being overturned, Martin, because it is a travesty of the law. This is... I mean, I suppose you could think, I mean, is it a prank that these strange 50 mile per hour... It was one sign. And the Met are saying they still intend to prosecute, though, because people were still breaking the law because it was in a 40 miles per hour average speed limit. It seems a bit unfair, don't you think, considering it wasn't a TfL sign or a Met Police sign?
Well, I wonder if this is a prankster, Diane, or is it actually somebody who's been a bit mischievous, a bit like the Blade Runners? They're putting up these signs so people can get off. Is it actually people trying to cheat TfL? Not, of course, that we would encourage such behaviour.
No, of course we wouldn't. But when you look at Sidcup, it's right in the Blade Runner area. And I did wonder if it was some kind of vigilantism of, we're not going to put up with these lowered speed limits. We're going to raise the speed limits ourselves. But there are cameras everywhere and they cause a huge amount of problems. Martin, I've come up, you know, I've looked at this and I feel very sad for the people involved in this. And I've decided to come up with some road signs myself. I've got this one. What do you think?
No electric bikes.
Well, it's if you're a cyclist and you go through a red light, you're allowed to be tasered.
Sorry, I shouldn't have.
Do you like it? Do you think we could get it in?
I don't think it will catch on. I can't encourage such lawlessness.
No, I mean, I'm not encouraging lawlessness at all. I don't think that people should be putting up fake signs, especially because it has a real impact on people's normal lives. But here, let's get some money back for the normal guy. What about this sign, Martin? What do you think of this? This is if two of... Oh, yeah, you guess.
No, go on, you tell me.
If you have 2 cancelled buses in a row, you get money.
Diane, we have to leave it there. Excellent props. That's very, very good forward thing. We'll have to get you back on again. Marvellous, and happy Valentine's Day. Right, thanks for joining me on the show today. It's been marvellous having your company. Stick around. After this, Jubes & Co with Michelle Juby. I'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. There'll be further rain to come for some of us, but for many of us it'll be a cloudy afternoon and evening with that mild air persisting, so it'll stay very close and muggy through this evening and overnight. That mild air is pushing north through the afternoon and it will reach the far north of Scotland where they have been escaping much of the wet weather so far today. So a cloudy night to come, plenty of rain arriving as well from the south and west. It'll push up to the northeast and then that's where it will sit through the evening, covering much of Scotland through much of the night, so some heavy bursts of rain to come here. Further south, though, it should dry out by the morning. However, if you are over the close to any higher ground or close to coastal areas, it'll be quite a misty morning once again, another very mild start to the day. Tomorrow, there'll be some quite persistent rain across parts of South Wales and the southwest. There's been quite a lot of rainfall already here so far this month, so there are some rain warnings in force for here as well as some areas of the Midlands as well. So we could see some travel disruption in these areas. But for many of us, we will see some further rainfall through Thursday. It's only in the southeast where we will escape the rain through much of the day, and it will be a mild afternoon there. That rain will clear away through Friday morning to leave many of us with a much brighter and drier day. So a bit of an improvement to come on Friday, some sunny spells by the afternoon, but there will be some further rain through Saturday evening and into Sunday. See you later on.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles
for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
Well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, British Army troops and vehicles have set off for Poland for the biggest NATO exercise since the Cold War. Is NATO needed now more than ever before? And speaking of forces, the Royal Navy plans to make all sailors attend compulsory courses on climate change. Is that really a good use of their time or not? And what do you think of Michael Gove's new ideas to make extending your home easier with no need at all for planning permission? Some say this is common sense and a great idea. Others say it will create civil war between neighbours. What side of the fence are you on? And the so-called gig economy, is this the height of flexibility for workers or downright exploitation? I'm asking because tonight delivery drivers are out on strike over the way that they are both paid and treated. And last but not least, get this right, government is going to be paying social media influencers. Even that phrase makes me go, ugh. Anyway, it's going to be paying them to try and stop migrant boat crossings. What do you think to this? Is this sensible? And let's face it, we'll try anything now, or a complete waste of money? Well, I've got Peter Hitchens and Matt Lars with me to get stuck into all of that. But before we do, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that Labour says there are strong checks on would-be MPs. And that's after a second Labour candidate was suspended following accusations of anti-Semitism. Former MP Graham Jones was reportedly recorded saying British people who volunteer to fight with the Israeli Defence Forces should be locked up. His suspension came only a day after Labour was forced to suspend and withdraw its backing for by-election candidate Azhar Ali. He was recorded suggesting Israel had used the October Hamas attack as a pretext to invade Gaza. Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to root out anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Meanwhile, a comedian has been banned from a London theatre after Jewish audience members were reportedly hounded out of his show. Paul Curry's been accused of encouraging the audience to chant and shout at an Israeli ticket holder after he refused to stand and applaud the Palestinian flag. Soho Theatre Central London has apologised and says it's looking into the incident. The audience member Leahav Aiton told GB News he felt excluded.
5 minutes of his show since he produced those 2 flags, like, I was taken immediately out of the show. Like, in my head, I was...
You felt excluded?
Yeah, excluded, and just in my mind, I was just, like, thinking about how unfair this comparison is. I just really didn't agree with that statement.
Economy news, and the rate of inflation remains at 4%, the same as December last year, despite economic forecasters predicting a rise. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found that food prices fell on a monthly basis, and that's for the first time since September 2021. But the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, criticised the figure, saying Conservatives can't fix the economy because they're the reason it's broken. The Prime Minister insisted the UK economy has turned a corner. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, agreed, though, more needs to be done.
Inflation never falls in a straight line, and although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%, and we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates. So this is a time to stick to a plan that is clearly working, but we need to make sure that we really get to that end point of inflation at 2%.
Now, extraordinary pictures have reached us of a knife-wielding man who's been jailed after a group of off-duty officers intervened in the attack he was trying to commit. Footage from this scene in South London, if you're watching on television, shows Joseph Jimenez repeatedly trying to stab another man with a large knife, and seeing the incident unfold, off-duty officers charged towards the attacker and managed to separate him from the victim. Southwark Police Force have called the action heroic and nothing short of exceptional. Jimenez has been sentenced to a total of 12 months in prison. Now, crossbow owners could face police checks under government plans to stop the weapons being used in violent attacks. And that comes after the convicted stalker Bryce Hodgson was shot dead by police last month after he broke into a London home armed with a crossbow. There are currently no registration systems in place for owning one and no need for a licence. Israeli strikes have hit villages across southern Lebanon today, killing at least 4 people, including a woman and her 2 children. Israeli forces say the attack, potentially the largest since the war began in the region, was in response to Hezbollah rocket fire, which killed a soldier. It comes as peace talks between Hamas and Israel have stalled, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying in the last hour the terror group have presented no new offer for a deal to get Israeli hostages back. Meanwhile, 18 out of 31 NATO countries are on track to meet the group's 2% military spending target. The alliance's chief, Jens